The Librem 15 by Purism is a surprising device, particularly among laptops designed specifically to run gnu+linux operating systems. Technically, it's a workstation class machine that sports an i7 processor, 2 solid-state drives, and up to 32 GB of RAM. And yet, it's also an ultra-thin and ultra-light computer. With its curved and triangular shape, its thickness is between 1 and 2 centimeters, which is about the same thickness as a small ballpoint pen in the front and a Sharpie on the back. It is lighter than the majority of computers we've tested, but we'll get back to that later in this video. With a 15.6 inches 1080p display, I can fit it snug in my medium-sized messenger bag without needing to plug it into external monitors to get work done. The display is an IPS, which means that you get reliable color reproduction from almost any viewing angle, and it has a matte finish, which is a huge plus. I've owned many laptops in my life, and when it comes to screens, nothing is more annoying than a glossy screen where you get a ton of reflections from windows or ceiling lights. Overall, the aluminum chassis feels sturdy without any noticeable flex. It's a very nice feel. This model sports a raw aluminum look, unlike the Librem 13 that has a black anodized aluminum finish. The hinge cover is plastic instead of metal like the rest, which is what we see on most laptops including the 2013 MacBooks. However, some newer laptops like the 2015 MacBook and 2016 MacBook do have a full metal hinge cover. I saw some previous reviews of older revisions of this model that were quite harsh, and I was relieved to see that the issues they mentioned have been fixed in this second revision of the laptop. The keyboard markings are alright, and there is the Purism logo instead of the Windows and Internet Explorer logo, and I have not encountered a problem with the fan. In my case, the fan stayed off when the system is not heavily loaded, but it did work pretty hard when I tried something more intensive like encoding video. The loudspeakers are below the computer, which means the way they sound will depend heavily on the type of surface the computer is on, whether it is wood, metal, stone, glass, and so on. That was actually not an issue for us. I always use studio headphones whenever I need quality, and I have never trusted any laptop's built-in speakers to deliver the kind of quality you would get from a pair of headphones or external speakers. The microphone has some audible noise, but thankfully the headphone jack has none. The microphone noise might be due to its rather unfortunate placement. Ideally, it should be on the screen frame at the top of the screen. That said, if you are someone who obsesses about the sound recording quality, you would never use a laptop's built-in microphone. You would get an external USB microphone at the very least, or a professional-grade phantom-powered microphone like what I'm using to narrate this video. The lid handle is somewhat short. The upside of the hinge's tightness is that the screen will not move by itself. The sleep and charge LEDs are located above the keyboard, and for future models we would recommend them to be somewhere outside of the laptop so that they are visible with the lid closed. That said, the fact that the sleep LED pulses instead of flashing during sleep is very nice. One of the very unique privacy-enhancing features of the laptops manufactured by Purism is the hardware kill switches for the webcam, the microphone, Wi-Fi, and Bluetooth. These devices actually cut the power to those hardware devices, so you can feel confident that Big Brother is not watching you. You don't have to put tape on your webcam and microphone. Actually, putting a tape onto a microphone achieves nearly nothing because it only muffles part of the sound, so a hardware kill switch is a very interesting approach here. For me, these switches work as advertised. I did see some other reviews where it was mentioned that after using the kill switches, the device would not come back on until a full reboot. And yet, from my testing, both the microphone and the webcam kill switches seem to be working. It might just be that you have to restart the application that was using the webcam. There are some usability issues though. The kill switches are not identified, so you never know which is which until you memorize them. Ideally, they should be silk screened, but in the meantime you will have to exercise your memory a bit. Additionally, it is not immediately obvious what direction means what. Besides the labeling, it would be nice to have LED indicators inside the chassis behind the switches. And finally, the kill switches themselves are rather small, so they would benefit from being larger and more rounded so that they feel more comfortable for the fingers. For an ultra-thin and ultra-light laptop, the Librem 15 is actually quite generous in the type of ports it provides. This particular model, version 2, came with 2 USB 2.0 ports, 2 USB 3.0 ports, and 1 USB 3.1 port with a USB Type-C reversible connector. It sports an HDMI 2.0 port, which works fine even at ultra-wide resolutions, a SD and MMC card reader, a dedicated standard power jack, and a standard headphone jack. The trackpad is similar to the 2013 MacBook. It's not the 2015 Force Touch trackpad from Apple, but it has about the same feel as their previous model. It is glass smooth and overall feels nice to the touch. If I have one criticism to make about this laptop, it is that the touchpad driver is in a fairly basic state at the moment, where some features are missing, like advanced palm rejection, better handling of multi-touch finger gestures, etc. Also, take note that if you turn off the touchpad and reboot, the trackpad will stay off. So if you temporarily disable the trackpad, don't forget to turn it back on before the next reboot. With some work, it will be possible to make the driver flawless to the point where it is as good as the MacBooks. In any case, keep in mind that these are all observations that I'm making at the time of this review. But it is possible that if you're watching this video some months down the road, the driver issues I'm pointing out might have been fixed. The keyboard feels okay, it's better than the average laptop, and it's roughly as good as the MacBook keyboard. But it's difficult to decide if I prefer it to the old ThinkPad keyboard. I've been using the old ThinkPad keyboards for almost a decade, and I'm fairly picky when it comes to keyboards, so take my criticism with a grain of salt. But globally, I prefer to have more travel for the keys, 2 mm of depth instead of 1 mm. To have rounded keycaps so that the fingers auto-center onto the keys, and to have sloped keys with no spacing between the slopes, instead of having real gaps. That said, those are all personal preferences. I've seen people prefer gaps between keys, and I was able to use this laptop daily without much of a problem beyond the initial adaptation period. After all, I measured the keycap sizes and the spacing between them, and they are exactly the same as on my ThinkPad's keyboard. The only difference are the travel depth, the surface shape, and the slopes being replaced by gaps. The backlighting is just as good as other high-end laptops I've seen, and it has 2 levels of intensity. The only problem is that upon suspend, the keyboard backlighting does not turn off, which is certainly a bug that can be fixed with a BIOS update. There are no num-lock and caps lock indicator LEDs. You can easily work around this problem in software by adding the Lock Keys GNOME Shell extension. I will leave the link in the description below this video. What would be amazing is if future models had the numpad keys light up when the numlock is turned on. Arrow keys would benefit from having a different tactile feel or shape. Otherwise, I personally tend to hit the numpad all the time. Most Ultrabooks are machines that are designed to be the most restrictive possible and to prevent you from tampering with them. On that aspect, the Librem is significantly different from what mainstream manufacturers do. Instead of relying on complicated designs, proprietary screws, or clips everywhere, Purism's laptops are made to be disassembled and serviced easily. All you need is a regular screwdriver to take off the standard screws holding the backplate, and you have access to all the guts of the computer. This is by far the easiest laptop disassembly I've ever seen. And let me tell you, I've disassembled a fair amount of laptops in my life. Unlike many Ultrabooks from mainstream manufacturers these days, the Librem 15 has user-replaceable and upgradable memory in storage. You can see 2 standard DDR3L RAM slots, which in my case were preloaded with 2 8GB RAM sticks made by Crucial, which is pretty much the best memory money can buy. The Librem 15 can actually have up to 32 GB of memory. In comparison, both the Dell XPS 13 Ultrabook and Apple's latest MacBook are limited to 16 GB of memory, and their memory chips are soldered directly onto the motherboard, which means you can't replace them or change your mind. Another uncommon and very welcome feature is the presence of two storage slots, one M2 and one standard SATA. In my case, I put a slim SATA SSD into the secondary slot, but you can also elect to insert a regular laptop hard drive if you don't need extreme performance and rather need multi-terabytes of storage in addition to the M2 SSD. This is a very, very flexible design, something I haven't seen in nearly 15 years, and certainly not in the ultra-portable market, especially when many manufacturers, like Apple, just solder the SSD directly onto the logic board. Even on much bigger laptops, the possibility of having two independent storage drives is rarely found today. If you are going to put in a conventional laptop hard drive into a Librem 15, take note that you will have to squeeze it a little bit against the board to allow the connector to fit. And you should then isolate the underside of the hard drive with some thin plastic sheet so that it does not short out against the aluminum case backplate. The screen hinges are solidly held to the chassis by not 2, but 4 screws on each hinge. The hinges mechanism is very tight, so even with the weight and the momentum of a 15-inch display, the screen won't budge easily. It will tend to stay in position. As you can see, I'm quite pleased with what I'm seeing here. Everything is solid, neat, user-serviceable, and more flexible than most laptops I've seen in years, all in a super slim form factor. At this point, the only thing I can imagine to make it more user-serviceable is a screwless chassis design, where the backplate would open using a latch. In terms of thermal design, the Librem 15 is okay, but could benefit from some improvements in future revisions. The main air intake is below the laptop in the center. Comparatively, the 2013 MacBook has its air intake on the sides, and the older ThinkPads had air intakes everywhere. The fan exhausting into the curved hinge is not the absolute most efficient design I've seen in terms of airflow, considering that the hinge is so close to it. Nevertheless, the test unit we received does manage the heat decently, not any worse than the average laptop. Short of carving a thinner hinge cover, one way to improve the exhaust in future designs might be to either increase the spacing between the hinge and the main chassis, or to cut the upper portion of the chassis and angle the vents upwards so that the air exits more easily through the top of the machine. The fan itself is a fairly standard fan, and it should be interesting to see a different fan blade design to further reduce noise in new revisions of the laptop. I would say there's maybe a bit of a missed opportunity to provide additional cooling for the unit by using the chassis as a giant heatsink, and perhaps then a pair of slower fans. But achieving that is a fairly complex challenge, so let's keep things real for now. All in all, it does the job. But I can definitely see some room for improvement when Purism manages to gain enough resources and supply chain leverage to do a complete redesign for this purpose. The screen is surrounded by rubber pads to prevent damage from the keyboard. However, there would need to be 2 more rubber pads in the corners of the screen. You can find small rubber pads like that on Amazon or eBay. Alternatively, you can also go to the dollar store, buy some shelf liner or a thin piece of soft cloth about 1 or 2 millimeters thick, cut it to the size of the case, and put it between the keyboard and the screen. This will provide additional protection from dust and physical stress when carrying your laptop in a tight backpack or messenger bag. Although it is a ridiculously powerful computer with a pretty big screen, it's still lighter than most other popular laptops we'd had available for comparison. For this review, we have measured the weight of each laptop using a high-precision digital scale with and without their power adapters. Most manufacturers do not readily disclose the weight of their power supplies, and yet that's a pretty important number to take into account for digital nomads, since one rarely travels for extended periods of time without a power adapter. The Librem 15 Mark II weighs just a tiny bit above 1.8 kilograms, which is equivalent to 3.99 pounds. When you add the power adapter to this number, you get a total weight of 2 kilograms and 9 grams, which is about 4.4 pounds. Overall, for a workstation class machine with a big screen like that, the Librem 15 is outstandingly portable. Sure, it's not as light as a 13-inch MacBook or a Surface Pro tablet, but to do that kind of comparison, you would need to look at the Librem 13 instead. When you compare the Librem 15 to the latest MacBook 15-inch model, the Librem has a fairly similar weight, about half a pound less in total. Last but not least, let's talk about power management and power consumption. The Librem goes to sleep automatically when you close the lid, and will wake up within a split second when you open the lid. With that sort of responsiveness and the reliability of a system truly designed for Linux, you essentially never have to shut down the machine unless you're storing it away for extended periods of time, or if you need to apply an important Linux kernel update. In my case, I've been using the machine for daily work for over 20 days straight without ever rebooting, only closing and opening the lid when I need to get back on the road. From my testing and calculations, a full charge requires approximately 3 hours and a half. With a full charge, Wi-Fi and 50% brightness on an idle desktop, this laptop battery gives an estimate between 5 and 6 hours. This seems to be in line with what I've seen in the specs and what I've experienced from some limited field testing. Most laptop reviews stop with what I've just said here. None of them take the time to talk about power consumption, which is certainly the most interesting bit. So let's take a look at that. We measured power consumption with an external watt meter with a measurement precision of roughly 1 watt. When you are charging the computer, the power supply only draws 1 additional watt, which is a really small amount. As for the computer itself, its power consumption is less than 1 watt when in sleep mode. From our testing and calculations, it will take 4 days and a half to empty a full charge during sleep while on battery power. While turned on, the computer itself will use about 6 watts when idle, 14 to 16 watts when playing HD video, and 21 watts when stressing the system to the maximum with some heavy compiling work. The screen will consume an additional 2 watts when turned on at minimum brightness and 6 watts at full brightness. Turning on the keyboard backlighting at the brightest setting will drain 1 additional watt, so remember to turn that off when you don't truly need it. Interestingly enough, the Librem 15's overall power consumption is less than the MacBook Pro we tested. In our benchmarks, the 13-inch MacBook would consume 12 watts while idle, plus 2 to 6 watts for the screen, which would translate to a total between 33 and 38 watts when playing a 1080p video. We did not stress test the MacBook with a CPU-intensive task, but even with a very conservative guess, we would presume it would easily go over 40 watts. During normal sleep, before the MacBook switches to hibernation mode, which Apple confusingly calls standby, the MacBook consumes between 1 and 3 watts. So all in all, the Librem is holding its own when it comes to power consumption. If anything, compared to the 13-inch MacBook Pro connected to the same watt meter, it seems to consume at least twice as much less power when switched on. And power consumption in sleep mode is just as good. The only missing thing at the time of this review is for the Librem to have a hybrid sleep mode involving hibernation to compete with what Apple calls standby mode. Thankfully, that's something that could be corrected in a software update, which would then yield 5 to 10 times longer standby capacity for the Librem. See the description below this video for links to additional information and tips on power management. All in all, the Librem 15 is a solid machine. It's mean, it's lean, and has the side effect of creating confusion for everybody around you due to its resemblance to a Mac, combined with the fact that it runs a completely free lib and open source operating system. It's quite an eye catch and a great conversation starter. Is the hardware the most absolutely perfect thing we've ever seen on the face of this earth, strictly speaking? No. Is it good? Yes! It's way above average, and it will quickly become a companion that you'll be carrying around everywhere to do some serious work on the go. The fact that it is manufactured in small batches by a company that launched barely 2 years ago makes it all the more impressive. If that is what Purism can do with the first iteration of its line of laptops, then the future might be quite interesting indeed. Alright, that's it for today. We hope you found this review useful. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up, and you can also subscribe to this channel to see the various types of video productions and branding work we do. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.